Accucut started off as this idea for dealing with lazorcut by providing some sort of limitation for clipping in order to prevent our boolean from overshooting the meshes so far. As we can see with this laser cut, the cut fits to the mesh. In fact, for the purposes of this, I'll draw the shape, but before extruding, I'll press L. So that way every shape I draw will draw to remain live. So we see that this shape remains live. If I draw this shape, it also remains live. And that's really the power of Accucut. The cool thing about Accucut is that if we were, say, to have both of these meshes selected, and we drew out a cut and clicked all the way through, we'll see that it's calculated to actually penetrate both shapes, depending on which one we have as our active selection. So it's always important to confirm your selection to make sure that you're not accidentally deselecting something else by accident. In fact, in this case, I see that there might be an automatic deselection of secondary object whenever live is being used. So just being mindful of that will help you get the most out of using lazorcut and Accucut. However, Accucut is now a toggle that can be toggled off and on. So one of the things you might notice is that whenever I extrude, it actually limits it to the depth of the form, not able to go any further. If I were to pause it, I could actually drag the dot and extrude this as far as I want. However, for the initial extrude, it will just draw to the bounds of the object. In fact, we even have it specially catered towards where if you're dealing with multi-select, it will also reach towards only the bounds of your selection, allowing you to cut with a contoured fill. And the reason for this initially was so that if you were to say Alt-W, switch over to Hops tool, you could actually hover over dots that are in the vicinity of your object to actually bring your cutters back rather than having dots all the way out in space in irrelevant areas. But just letting users know that in the event that you do not like the Accucut behavior, you can of course turn it off. However, it is on by default, and it has been on for the last couple of versions, and we've just fought to, make it better and better so it can be a suitable default. But having Accucut on also gives the added bonus of being able to draw in front mode, as you see me doing here, and just dragging to penetrate the form. And this actually works in any view, not just front view. This has been of course, a long time request, so I'm happy to announce that it's finally a part of HardOps. This was something I was actually talking about earlier in the video, but I wanted to also do a section just talking about Accucut and how you can get the most out of it when it comes to Boxcutter. Whenever you're looking at an object frontally, if you were to draw a cut and begin moving the mouse, you're performing an extrusion, but you're using a system that's different than the extrusion you would get if you were to rotate your view and actually move your mouse out, because in this view we're actually extruding in accordance with our mouse cursor. But whenever you're looking at it in front view, we're attempting to use something that's a little bit more streamlined and optimized for view aligned frontal cutting. So it's important to keep that in mind. Sometimes you may be working and you'll be wondering why your movement may feel odd in both directions, and it's because there's a different system for whenever you first extrude locked onto the view. This can come in handy for things like, say, bringing up a circle and just cutting all the way through a mesh, or cutting only a particular amount through. You could also even press Shift T and taper it. I'll press Control D, go in and adjust the vert count and just place it. Control, jump off this point, bring it back a little bit, press Shift T, and even though I don't really have any conception of how much depth I have, I'm at least able to perform varying depths that are different between just me and the normal laser cut options that would be available. Whenever I refer to laser cut, I'm talking about just drawing a shape, giving it no depth, and just clicking, and it will just cut through the mesh. But just letting you know that there is a different type of extrusion method here that's in place than whenever you draw a shape and rotate your view and then begin performing the extrusion. So this might throw new users off, but should definitely come in handy whenever you're looking at things head on and are trying to perform an extrusion. However, what determines head on? If I look at this from this state and I begin moving the mouse, we see that this same extrusion method also takes over. But if I were to just rotate the view slightly, now I'm able to bring the shape back to its origin. I'm able to extrude it all the way through. I'm able to bring it all the way back. And this is something that you normally can't do on the initial extrusion that you're going to be given by Boxcutter. The reason it's like this is because initially we only had this constrained to view, but the subject of what about a surface came up, and so now you're looking at one of the interim steps of us finding our quote-unquote final solution. So what I'll do from here is just delete this object, and we'll just Shift A, add a cube, and I'll press Q, and let's just activate sphere cast. So now this object's been converted into a sphere. So now there comes a question. How can we cut a circle directly in front of the sphere? If we try to use snap dots, we would just look for our snap dot, grab this area, and cut through, and hope that it grabs the right normal and takes it all the way through in a straight direction. But we see that that wasn't the case. I could, of course, bring back Everscroll, Alt-R, to begin having to deal with manually positioning this, and then I could shift grab this, use reset axis, press Y and Z, and that is already a pretty big nightmare. Just letting you know that there's an easier way where you can just turn on grid, and having your mesh selected, of course, we can just start drawing off the mesh and then begin dragging to begin performing our extrusion. And without even having to rotate the view, I can give this a tapered cut going into the center. We'll do the same thing here where we begin bringing it back, pressing Shift T in order to taper. I have no idea how much depth is there, but I'm having fun finding out just visually as I'm working. So just letting you know that frontal cutting is one of the main goals that we sought to resolve with this release. It's a popular question how you can cut a hole directly in front of an irregular surface, and hopefully this answers that. When it comes to view alignment and grid, it's also been improved in Streamline. If I click and select my object and I begin tapping control, you can see that I'm attempting to orient the grid to the surface. If I have my mouse off of the surface, I'm now orienting with grid, which can bring a little bit of sanity back with such an irregular surface. And just in the same fashions that I've shown previously in this video, if I were to start off of the mesh and just bring the grid over the mesh, I can now begin using the frontal grid also on a surface of a regular nature. So if I try to, say, draw it this way, we see that that maybe isn't the most desired result. However, if I were to hold control, start off of the mesh, I can even bring this to the center of this, bring it out, get a certain amount of depth, press Shift T in order to taper it, press spacebar, and just like that I'm able to have this cut exactly where I want it. I could select the shape, start off the mesh, find another area, control double click, and it's going to repeat the cut. However, because of the whole Accucut thing, it didn't actually trim it to fit it exactly as I wanted, so we'll just need to use Everscroll, recall the cutter, bring it out, and here we are back in business.